Hello everyone, thanks for coming. This talk is entitled Gorillas in Our Midst, the Runtime Secrets of Evasive IoT Malware. So first I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Fitzpatrick. I have had an unusual path into cybersecurity. I initially did my undergrad in music technology at the Sonic Arts Research Centre. I then spent 20 years in the music industry as a recording engineer and a touring musician and DJ. During COVID, I pivoted to software development, as a lot of people in my industry did, and I graduated there last June and came straight into a PhD at the Centre for Secure Information Technology at Queen's down in Titanic Quarter. Today we'll be discussing the GorillaBot. My dissertation and my master's was focused on IoT and building an embedded system. So the PhD came up and it's IoT for malware and dynamic analysis of IoT malware. So first up, I'm just going to talk about the IoT threat landscape. There are currently 15 billion IoT devices. Many of these lack very basic security features. There's no encryption, hard-coded passwords, little to no patching. IoT malware is also getting smarter, more evasive, more adaptive, and it is now cross-platform, capable of running on everything from ARM to MIPS to x86. That means that traditional antivirus or endpoint protection isn't lightweight enough for these devices. So if we think about where these devices are, they're in our homes, they're in industry, they're in our critical infrastructure, they're in our hospitals. Some of them are just simple sensors with internet connection. So they have very limited memory, processing power, and storage. So this gap is being exploited by malicious actors, especially the likes of like botnets, which we're going to be looking at today. So during my PhD, I've been using two approaches to malware analysis, which we're going to be looking at today. The first is static analysis, which involves inspecting the code without actually running it. So it's fast, it's safe, and it effectively maps capabilities without requiring to be run in a sandbox. However, static analysis won't reveal what the code actually does at runtime, especially if it's obfuscated or packed or encrypted. So this is where dynamic analysis comes in. We execute the code in a controlled environment and observe the actual behavior of the code, for example, system calls, network activity, runtime opcode traces. This is particularly useful against polymorphic or metamorphic malware, which change their code structure to evade static detection, but always behave the same way when executed. So I'm going to talk a wee bit about the Mirai botnet architecture. So the GorillaBot, which we're going to be looking at today, is basically an evolution of Mirai. It's a new variant. So basically, infection begins when bots scan for new devices with default or weak credentials, usually over Telnet or SSH. Once a device is compromised, its IP address is then sent to a report server. The report server coordinates with load servers to deliver the appropriate malware variant based on the device's architecture. The victim then joins the botnet and begins communicating with the C2 server. C2 server sends instructions to the bots to which targets to attack, how to spread further, etc. The bots can then also perform coordinated attacks, and the loop then continues. So discovery, infection, reporting, control, and attack, and this enables the botnet to grow rapidly and to maintain control. So looking at GorillaBot, which is an evolution of Mirai. It's a recent Mirai-based botnet, first seen in September 2024, and in the first month of September, it was responsible for hundreds of thousands of attacks. So through our dynamic and static analysis, we will be looking at the code to show examples of 4 aspects of the GorillaBot. So the first is its environment-aware anti-detection strategies. Next, we'll be looking at the multi-architecture payloads, which are downloaded through a custom shell script. Next, we'll be looking at its adaptive propagation strategies, and then its XTEA cipher for C2. So first, looking at the environment-aware sandbox evasion. So firstly, it'll check for TracerPid in proc self-status. This is to detect whether or not it's actually being debugged. Next, it detects for kubepods to see if it's being run in a Kubernetes container by looking at proc1c group. And this is, so you can see here, this is from our static analysis. This here is from our dynamic system call run trace. And you can actually see the TracerPid system call check there. So the first line there, it opens proc self status. It then reads from FD3 into a buffer looking for the TracerPid. And then it closes it there to allow for the next process, which is its kubepod system call check. So you can see they're a very, very similar kind of process. If either of these conditions are met, it'll terminate immediately. So there's no payloads or no persistence. With this cheeky little message, file system not found, exiting, GorillaBotnet did not like this honeypot. Okay, so this environment-aware behavior makes GorillaBot evasive, and it also renders basic sandboxing techniques ineffective. Okay, next we'll look at its multi-architecture delivery. So GorillaBot keeps Mirai's scan brute force attempt at logging in, but it changes the installation model slightly. So loaderless staging involves fetching a pre-built multi-architecture kit in one shot and self-selects the correct binary. The bot will then pick locally, either by reading the CPU type through proc CPU info or simply cycling through and using trial and error on each binary until the correct one runs. So this cuts out the loader-reporter dependency and it makes propagation easier. So if we look at its adaptive propagation strategies, GorillaBot will initially brute force default credentials over Telnet or SSH, which is similar to Mirai. However, it has multiple payload execution strategies. So it begins with fileless infection, pipes the payload directly into the shell using wget. And then you can see that if that isn't successful or wget fails, it adapts and falls back to alternative protocols like TFTP, FTP-GET, or curl. We also see a hard-coded reference to BusyBox there. This is shipped to ensure that it's compatible with severely resource-constrained devices. Finally, if the fileless approach fails, GorillaBot will download the payload to disk and execute it in the background. So we can see here is again our dynamic system call run trace. And you can see there my binary, the last process. It drops in a new initial script, and then wget pulls a remote script and execute it. So looking at adaptive propagation, after infection, GorillaBot performs local area network discovery using msearch and multicast DNS to identify nearby devices such as smart TVs, cameras, and other IoT equipment on the network. Any suitable candidate is then subjected to the same infection and propagation process. The botnet also issues lightweight probes to game and voice service protocols, so you can see there TeamSpeak. And it builds to build a list of DDoS reflectors. Then when fetching payloads over HTTP, it spoofs Windows Chrome user agent to make these requests appear like normal traffic, which is another of its detection evasion measures. Okay, finally, just talking briefly about its XTEA cipher for C2. We can see here from our static analysis that GorillaBot masks its C2 endpoints with an XTEA-style cipher string. However, dynamic analysis can help us see what's actually going on. So after decryption, it learns its outward IP via UDP poke to 8888. And then it opens a TCP listener on 384.242. So this reinforces the fact that dynamic analysis will show things that even that static analysis can miss, especially if it's noisy or obfuscated or encrypted. So the dynamic analysis will reveal the true runtime behavior of the malware. So this leads me on to my research. I recently had a paper published. It's entitled Lightweight AI-based malware detection using opcode and system call analysis across IoT architectures by myself and my supervisors, Dr. Carlin and Dr. McLaughlin over at CSIT. And we compare static opcode analysis techniques with dynamic opcode and system call analysis. So the work moves beyond static inspection. Our dynamic analysis pipeline captures the opcodes and system calls of the malware binaries and learns these behaviors across various architectures. So I'm just going to talk about how our dynamic analysis pipeline works. Our malware samples are collected from various IoT architectures. For this particular one, we used the 4 main ones that we had samples for. So it was ARM, x86, MIPS, and MIPSIL. Binaries are executed in isolated virtual environments for the dynamic run traces. Static and dynamic opcodes and system calls are captured within a QEMU environment. The data is then used to train random forest models and evaluated using cross-validation and synthetic minority oversampling technique to address the class imbalance. So one of the issues that we ran into was that there are many more malware samples than there are benign samples. So we were talking a ratio of maybe 10 to 1. Using SMOTE prevents the model from overfitting towards the majority class. The outputs were then labeled as malicious or benign and fed into a random forest model. So I'm just going to show you a wee bit about the results here. So we can see here, in case you can't read that, the static analysis is in red and the dynamic analysis is in green. So dynamic opcode analysis achieved 100% accuracy across multiple architectures. Static models performed slightly less favorably, especially on x86 and MIPS. ARM binaries showed equally high performance under both methods. But in general, dynamic analysis outperformed the static analysis, suggesting that runtime behavior is a better indicator of malicious intent. And again, it reinforces the benefit of dynamic execution traces in detecting malware. So the next question is, can our model successfully identify GorillaBot as malware? And thankfully, the answer is yes. So we took the GorillaBot example that we had performed the static and dynamic analysis of. We did a runtime opcode trace. So the times that we've chosen for all of the traces was 3 minutes. That was a trade-off between the amount of data that we could get from them and also computational expense. So in total, there was around 60,000 samples to analyze. If you think you're running them in 3 minutes in a sandbox, so the VM has to start up and then run the malware, and then it has to shut down and then restore from a previous snapshot, to prevent like further infection or compromisation of the system. So when you're talking about 60,000 samples, that was going to take about 3 months of continuous analysis. So for the analysis, we only selected about, say, 2,500 from each architecture, but we're currently developing an automated pipeline where we can split it across multiple machines, and we can analyze a lot more at simultaneously. So we ran our GorillaBot, and then we fed it into the saved random forest model, and you can see some of the metrics here. So it predicted it with 100% confidence, which just further confirms our dynamic analysis pipeline as a predictor of unseen malware. So I'll just talk a wee bit about future work. So the idea next is to optimize these models for embedded deployment. Like I said before, a lot of these devices are severely resource constrained. So to be able to run these models on something like an Arduino or an ESP32, what we need to do is prune the models initially to reduce the size of them. So pruning the models will reduce some of the nodes without that much reduction in the accuracy of the predictions. Also, we can save a lot of memory by using quantization from floating point 32-bit to integer 8-bit. You can actually reduce the memory requirements by a factor of 8. So these will then be deployed using TinyML inference engines such as TensorFlow-like. And the idea is eventually to implement some kind of cascading classification pipeline where you have so maybe some kind of like an edge device for fast detection on device, and then escalating it to an intermediate device or a fog server or cloud for advanced analysis. So this hopefully will enable quicker zero-day detection of unseen malware. Okay, and thank you very much for listening. There's my LinkedIn if anybody wants to get in touch. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, thank you.